few nations, like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Thailand, and Ethiopia, escaped colonization, unlike most of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Japan also avoided being colonized, but the reason is unique. It eventually became a colonial power itself, ruling places like the Nanpo, Ryukyu, and Kuril Islands. In this video, we'll explore how Japan managed to resist foreign domination. Stick with us until the end to uncover the full story. By the late 1800s, Japan began looking outward. Taiwan became its first colony after the First Sino-Japanese War. Soon after, Japan joined the Western powers in expanding across East Asia, annexing Korea, and showing that it was now a colonizer, not the colonized. In the 20th century, Japan kept pushing further, seizing Sakhalin, German colonies like the Caroline Islands, and Manchuria. But its empire collapsed in 1945 with the end of World War II. For about 50 years, Japan's own colonial strength made the idea of conquering it unthinkable. But what about the centuries before that? So what really kept Japan safe? It wasn't completely untouched by Europe. The Portuguese arrived first in 1543. At first, their presence was about trade. They brought silk and porcelain from China, goods Japan couldn't access directly, and in return, they gained more influence in Asia. Firearms also flowed into Japan, becoming especially important during the Sengoku period of civil war. But not everything the Portuguese did was welcome. They also began a slave trade, buying Japanese, especially women, and selling them overseas. This quickly became a serious issue, even troubling Portugal's own king. King Sebastian feared the slave trade would damage Portugal's Catholic reputation, especially while missionaries were trying to spread Christianity in Japan. In 1571, he officially banned the practice, but in reality, the trade continued. Meanwhile, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Japan's great unifier, grew furious. He was tired of seeing his people sold abroad. He even wrote to the Portuguese Jesuit leader, Gaspar Coelho, demanding an end to the trade and the freedom of all Japanese slaves. But some historians call this hypocritical, because while Hideyoshi condemned the trade of Japanese, he himself enslaved thousands of Korean prisoners of war. Hideyoshi's anger only grew. Soon, he blamed the Jesuits directly. This was exactly what King Sebastian had hoped to avoid, but it was too late. Hideyoshi eventually banned Christian missions in Japan, and by 1595, the slave trade was officially outlawed. But by then, the damage was done. Japan began to see the Portuguese, especially the Jesuits, as a threat to its independence. By the 17th century, Japan cut ties completely, and Portugal never dared to push back. Why? Because colonizing Japan was nearly impossible. The Japanese had firearms, had learned to make their own, and had a large population hardened by years of civil war. They were more than ready to fight. Distance was another factor. Japan was far from Europe, and moving enough troops across the seas would have been unrealistic. On top of that, Japan didn't offer the kind of resources or trade goods that made other colonies so valuable. Meanwhile, Portugal, Spain, and other colonial powers were already busy managing the colonies they had. For them, any new territory had to be extremely profitable, and Japan just wasn't worth the effort. Europe itself was also unstable, with monarchies constantly competing and fighting wars. Add to that the growing threat of the Ottoman Empire, and Japan slipped even further down the priority list. All this meant Japan never became a serious target. Its distance, its strong defenses, and its lack of tempting resources made colonization too costly and too risky. In the end, Japan avoided colonization thanks to both luck, like its geography, and its own strength. Even centuries before building an empire, Japan's military and population would have made any invasion a gamble for Europeans. When Japan did rise as a colonial empire, the tables completely turned. Japan became the colonizer, not the colonized. Some argue Portugal might have had a chance in the 16th century when they first arrived. But realistically, the odds were always against them. The slave trade scandal only made things worse. But even without it, no European power could have colonized Japan without suffering massive losses. And so, the Japanese archipelago remained free from colonization, apart from Portugal's brief and troubled presence. Japan was never colonized, because in an age of empires, it was simply too strong, too distant, and too costly to conquer.